All right. So, yeah, I was mentioning, and this is probably the third time I've actually said this now, but I'll go ahead and say it again. There are a lot of times when I'm talking with coworkers or friends who are just adopting Arrow, and a lot of times they tell me that they were looking for a good solution for either, and that's how they ended up getting into Arrow. So, Alejandro, I'd love to hear a little bit about like what is either and what is a good use case for it.
Yeah, so I think you can think of either like in two different ways. One is like, what if you had like your result type, the usual, like, happy path or failure, but your failure didn't have to be a throwable. You can actually configure what kind of errors you want. Another way you can look at it is like a kind of a nullable, and a nullable says, well, I failed, but gives you no information of why it failed. So why if you could attach this extra information. And the typical case where this is very useful is validation, right? Because in validation, you have a clear happy path, your thing is correct, but you also have a failure path where you want more information, right? Especially if you are developing your application, often you want to have some information about what fields actually failed, right? Because you want to put them with a different color, you want to show the corresponding message. So having all this information is something which could be easily tracked by using either. We actually built like a nice library, so you essentially only focus on the nice things, and under the hood, if there are problems, you can actually, for example, in the case of validation, accumulate them, or you can say I want to fail first. So there is a lot of configuration there. So what we often uh, uh, tell people is to think of their errors like in essentially in two buckets. So some of them are real exceptions. Think are your implementation detail. For example, I cannot connect to the server, right? The fact that something talks to a server is an implementation detail on some level, right? So this should be still an exception, and that's what the resilience library is for, right? You deal with the resilience. But there are some errors which are really part of your domain. The validation is an example. For example, if you are accessing a database that a user is not there, it's also maybe part of your domain because it's something you need to handle, especially, right? It's a bit, if you would like to have like a when and then say, if I do this, show this screen, otherwise show this other screen, that usually points to you that this is something you want to keep in your domain. And either it's just a set of prepackaged utilities which go very well with that use case.
Yeah, that's great. I'm thinking you might or might not like what I ended up doing here. So I'm going to show you what I did and how I ended up using it. Let me pull up the view model over here as well, the edit view model. So I started originally with this try catch. And what I did on the right is I changed it to using just this catch function, which is part of Arrow. And then I did a result.fold. And when it's the left, that means that something went wrong and we had an error. And if it's right, then it means that it went right. And so this is one of the things I did like about this approach here is that it does kind of line everything up. So let me show you what I mean a little bit here. But as I mentioned before, there are basically 3 steps to most of the operations that I'm requesting in a view model. So a lot of times it's going to be first we update the UI state to let it know that we're loading something, then we're loading something, and then we update the state again. And that's done here and here. And just the way this is structured, where we're kind of the steps 3A or 3B are kind of like indented here. But I kind of like that we're at least lined up visually here so that steps 1, 2, and 3 are all indented in the same way. And I know it's a small thing, right? Compared to not having side effects or all these other characteristics that we get from FP. But I did at least like the way that arranged it. But you were telling me just a minute ago that you typically would kind of manage things differently for requests and things that would be like validation and things inside the app, right?
Yeah, this is like also I would say a bit of a corner case because it's like one line, right? So changing the try to the catch actually takes you more space, so to say. Uh, Yeah, but I think that this, for example, shows a case where you really want to use this data to change the UI state. So for example, like particularly what I would do is here I would maybe keep the try catch. But if I instead wanted to like have this not in an update, but maybe in my UI, in my composable, I want to do something different, then I would use the either to like save the information and then there use the fold or just a normal when to decide. So it's also a bit of when you want to use the information. The either allows you to save that information for later. It also allows you to compose information. So again, here we have only one line. Maybe if we had, both fetching the wrestlers, but also like, maybe in a scenario where then we want to do something else like getting the avatar or the image or whatever, maybe then I will start using an either block, which is like a way you have in Arrow to compose several of those eithers together. And you actually, I think this is not used by many people. There is actually a version of bar map which actually also works within either. So sometimes if you get far in this, you end up sometimes returning like either of something, and then you have the case where you want to do things in parallel, but they are all either. So you want to like do all of this at once. So people then find it useful to have like a bar map or either all together, right? So which both does the parallel thing and also does all the thing about handling errors. And in that case, it's also useful. Like if you have a left, which is like the failure case, uh, then you want to cancel and all of that. The way for people when they hear left, I and think what is this about? That's uh, just a joke somebody did, I guess, in some Oxford Edinburgh University, and then it's like things can be right, and if they are not right, well, they are left.
So that really is. I was kind of joking
So
about myself, but I guess that's really the mnemonic for it, huh?
yeah, I still find it very 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 difficult to uh, it's a crazy thing to me still, but that's where the name comes from. Like you mentioned there, if left, and people may be wondering why left. Well, again, if not right, it's
If not
left.
right, left. That's pretty.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
yeah. It's one of the things we routinely get from people. Like, why don't you rename it to wrong? And it's like, well,
Mm,
it's so embedded in like if you read functional programming, people using this, they use the name left so over the place that actually renaming it is kind of very difficult at this point. But yeah.
sure. Yeah. No, I think it's fine to follow the convention. It's kind of good to have a little mnemonic for it too, though. So that's great. And I heard about you've also got a raised DSL. I've heard about. Do you want to talk just for a minute about the differences between either and using that raised DSL?
Yeah, so the raised DSL is kind of a DSL like a small language where you can easily compose these things together. So often if you look at the languages which have either, they will often tell you, well, you need to use a lot of map or this operation called flat map to operate with them, right? Or have some languages like Haskell or Scala have like a special notations to work with them, like do notation or for comprehensions or things like this. uh, but we managed to like get the best of both worlds in this DSL, where you actually can like inside a block you write like either, and then you say, well, I want to work with either things, and then when you get something that you want to work with, which is an either, you work normally, and then when you have the either, you do dot bind, and that's like the unwrapping. So that's an operation which takes care of uh, if there was a problem, then the problem is kind of bubble up or accumulated, depending on, as I said, the policy you want for errors in your either, and then otherwise you keep working. So you have this very nice thing where if you have two, for example, you have two things which are eithers, errors, or ints, and then you want to add the map. In other languages, you need to call like blah 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 dot flat map, blah 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 dot flat map, So it's very indented and it's very weird. In something like a Scala, you need to do like 4 and then X and then like a back arrow. So you have to break them with either, and with arrow you just say first thing dot bind plus second thing dot bind, and everything just works. So it's the rise is like a simple way to use either, which looks essentially it's the same idea like Kotlin has with suspend, right? Suspend does things under the hood. We know it, right? But when you look at this, it's just, well, it does its magic, and you just have to put the suspense. So the idea here is the same. You just write either, and then there is magic, of course, in the library, but you only need to care about what's going on. What's like the thing you really care, not what is your not flat no flat map, which is who knows what a flat map is actually. So
Well, we got a question here from Thomas that I think you could maybe answer. In my project, we have a result type with success loading an error. Is that basically the same as either?
So it's not exactly so. So when either has like error or result, right? So there is always a fine line, because some people say, well, I will just use an either and then like I don't know, a nullable thing, and then my if it's not an error, right? If it's a write, but my thing is nullable, that means I'm loading, and otherwise, you have all the cases. I personally don't like that. I just go and define my own seal hierarchy with the cases I want, like it's loading, because also when you imagine you have this and then you want to show in the UI, then you suddenly have, what do you prefer to have when loading a screen, okay screen error, or do you prefer to have when it's left, when it's right and my value is null, do this? That's very complicated. So I often suggest people to just have their own hierarchy. That's fine. If you really want to have the best of both worlds, there is a way to use your race DSL with your own types. You have to define kind of what happens when you have several computations which fail, and well, I guess in this case, if something is loading, the whole thing is loading. I don't know. That depends on your. So you can do this. It's complicated. It's not something I fully recommend. For this, by the way, for the specific case of loading, success, and error, there is a library called I don't really know how to pronounce, but Quiver or something like this. So the people from Cash App did like a library to be a companion to Arrow Core, which has this particular data type, because they find it quite useful. So we decided that it was not interesting enough for like all of our users, but it's another library. So we just, in the Arrow documentation, we just say, well, if you need this, just go and get the library, because, well, somebody is maintaining this.
Yeah. Well, let's see. We have one more question I will put up here. What if we only care about the exception, like delete returning void, but I want to know if there's an exception?
Yeah, so like again, that depends on what you want to do with your exception. If you really want to work as an exception in the sense that you want to take advantage of like the bubbling up of exceptions, then just treat it as an exception, right? There is a lot of cases where if there is an exception, like in your server, all you want to do is to log and restart. So then exceptions work perfectly. If you want to act upon the exception, it's the moment where you want to start thinking about, do I want to have an either? And I would take it, as I said before, to the next step. Is this really an exception, or is this something like a domain error? It's an error in my domain. In that case, definitely go for your own seal hierarchy, go for your either, because that means that you want to treat this as data throughout your application. So in that case, just move into a more let's say data oriented version of that.
Great. Well, I've got one more. I know we're unbelievably already up on an hour here, and Alejandro, I was not expecting to keep you this long, so I appreciate you sticking around. Do you still have time for optics? I'd love to show everybody.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
always
okay.
have interruptives, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, optics are really cool. So yeah, this is the last big feature that I wanted to look at. And one of the common problems that we run into when we're writing composed code is the nested data structures for our UI state. And we talked about this a little bit down here when we were looking at the individual properties that we're updating, where we're just setting the name of the wrestler or the age. But it gets even more complicated when we get down here to, we've got a separate model for the hometown. And so now we've got a copy and another copy and another copy. And so in order to, but we still need to update the UI state in order for it to flow, right? The state changes are emitted downward, the events are propagated upward, and you get that one-way cycle. And the immutable data structures are usually how we do that. But when you have the nested structures like this, that's kind of where things get a little bit hairy. So this one requires the KSP plugin and a few other small changes, including adding an annotation, which is not too bad, but also ensuring that we've got a companion object. You can see here, I've got this at optics on here. I've got the companion object, even though I have no content for that companion object. And I also noticed, and maybe you can tell me a little bit about this later, but I had to change from having a nullable wrestler to just using a default wrestler. I think when I had it as a nullable wrestler, I couldn't find the optics for it. But here's what it looks like when we use optics. So we're basically able to crush down our nested copies into a single line again that reads a lot like just, well, it reads better when I take that pop-up off, but it reads a lot like just a regular setter almost, right? I've still got here I've got this modify where I'm passing in the UI state, which is coming from here, and setting the name that way. But it really does make it a lot easier to read. It takes a lot of that noise out of the way for all these extra copies. So it's a really neat idea, and I think there's a little bit of overhead to get through, especially with KSP and multi-platform projects. I still feel like I don't quite understand how everything needs to fit together there. But yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit about this, and I thought it was a really neat feature, and I'd love to know if I'm using it the right way or if you've got better ideas here.
Yeah, I mean that's how. Well, optics has like two main use cases. One is the one here. It's about when you need to modify nested data structure, which if you try to follow an kind of immutable way to look at things, and really structure your things, then you always end up in this problem. So this gives you a way to do this. And actually, interesting enough, the solution is like what I mentioned about the schedule, is separating what I want to do from doing it. So what actually the plugin does under the hood is creating all of these .wrestler.hometown. Those are what we call the optics. And an optic is like, it's kind of a reference to a field, but we don't know of which object yet. So by doing this, you can build a bigger reference. So this people call this a lens, because you are like zooming in. And then at the end, once you know where you want to zoom in, then you can just say, well, modify this thing and create a copy with this change. So that's essentially the main idea here. There is unfortunately a bit of complexity because up to now, the best solution we came up to have these optics is to generate them using KSP. KSP is not able to create a companion object. That's why you need it there. We have these wonderful plans of migrating all of this to the K2 compiler plugin API once it stabilizes, and then none of this would be needed. But that's what we have now, right? And in theory, once you set up your KSP once, you've set it up for forever. But that's the main idea. Just being able to say where you want to go and then say, well, modify this thing. And there is another use case for optics that most people don't use, but it's also quite interesting, that it allows you to have very complicated queries on data. So there are optics like this one, which are called lenses, which is about zooming in on a single thing. But there's other kinds of optics, these are called traversals. Name doesn't matter. The point is that it like focuses on several times. So this gives you like a language very like SQL like, where you can say, please go and for each of these elements, get me the name and then do this. And you can even use this to modify everything at once. So you can like, if you have a bunch of wrestlers, you can focus on all the names at the same time. You do something like wrestlers.every.name, and then when you modify, you are actually modifying each of them uniformly, which is useful. So for example, with this, we built like a JSON library in which everything you get essentially like JQ, but within Kotlin. And this is just done because each of them is an optic. They compose very well, so you get just a JQ-like language for free.
Yeah, man, that is really impressive. I feel like there's a whole lot more to the optics that I felt like I was really only scratching the surface when I was working on this, but it does seem like there are some really neat use cases for it. And so I'm going to look forward to looking into some of those even more. And you even made an update to the repository here as well. You made some changes to the project. So I'm going to pull in, let's see if I can pull in your changes here. First, I got to stash this here. And you did something that made it look like this, and we're gonna have to rebuild the project, of course. So let me do that real quick. But you got it looking even better than I did, where I had to use the modify and pass in it with the Lambda. But this is really clean, where it's just the name set name. That is really nice. So tell me about this. This is particular to Compose, is that right?
Yes. No. So this actually combines two things. So in the same way that you have a modify, there is a version of modify which we also call copy, because it's like copy, where you can actually have a bunch of name of a lens, which could be a field, but like a nested field set and then the value. So it's like copy, right? In copy, you'd say this field equals blah. We cannot use the equals name because, well, it is not allowed in Kotlin. So we use set, which is the closest we could. But it essentially is a copy of copy. It's the same idea of copy, where you can just say, do this, set to this several times, because sometimes you want to not set only one field, but several of them. And then nesting modifies, it's really convoluted because, well, you need to like nest them, modify, and then another modify. So I think if you go up in that code, you can see that sometimes you need this. And then we figured out that if you are using Compose, what you do all the time is update copy. So you can just use update copy, which
update
is
copy. Makes sense.
It's just one fewer indentation level, which is already a win. But it kind of it's such a common pattern in Compose code that we made this small library, which is essentially update copy for mutable state and update copy for mutable flow, and that's all that it is. And it already kind of, by building on the other optics, allows you to have this, just smaller code without so many nested copies, which is like, again, in one line is like a very narrow gain, right? Like, but once you do this for all your code and you have tons of view models, then, well, you're suddenly removing a lot of noise from your code.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We've got, is there any chance you could show the code, how this Lambda works? Let's see, the update copy Lambda, I'm guessing. So we might be able to show that, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, sure.
Let's see here. Might be a little bit nested. Let me expand this full screen and zoom in just a little bit here. So update copy. I assume we're going to have to dive in a little bit here. Oh, that's just going into mutable. Yeah, okay.
You may want to look at the copy, because this is not the same copy that you are used to. It's the copy for optics.
Okay.
So that's
Yeah.
where the magic lays.
So that's part of what's built by the
Yeah,
KSP then, right?
maybe the one on top. I don't know.
Yeah. Up here.
Yeah, so you see there, that's a very it's that's where the magic actually happens. So you can see there is this copy A receiver, and the copy A is an interface which has set and transform, which is like the modify. So you can like build something not just to this value, but on the elements, taking each element and applying a transformation. But that's where all lives. So the implementation itself is not very complicated. It's like an something which just keeps the current value, right? And then when you do set, we do the optics.modify and put it as the new value in a variable. And this is, it's like local mutability. So this is never shown outside. So this is all safe. But it's just this trick. Like there is nothing, no more magic than this one. Just keep this thing moving, and at the end, the current thing is at the end of the copy. The current thing is just returned, and you're done. You have like a
Yeah.
DSL to do this. It's the same idea that people use, for example, when they use builder patterns in Kotlin. It's the same kind of idea, but applied to the problem of copy.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I think it's a really I still have to get my head around it a little bit, but it's really a cool idea. And I'm not the only one here. We got somebody else saying the update copy will be really handy. So this is great. Like, I just want to say, like, for a lot of people, anybody using Compose, I really feel like if you're kind of doing this UI state object thing and you've got nested pieces in there, it's just going to really make life so much easier. So I'd love to see more folks using Compose to pull in the Arrow library as well. Let's see here. I set multiple fields inside the update copy block.
You can just have as many lines of set as you want.
Yeah, and I think even you had done that. Up here.
Yeah,
you had done that there. Yeah, and that really looks clean. I really like that.
Yeah, we are working, and we hope that once context parameters get into the language, hopefully soon, actually we will be able to remove the wrestler edit UI state, which is kind of noise, right? So why do I have to repeat the class name?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for this we need 2 receivers, so we need context parameters. But once they are in the language, then it will be even cleaner.
Yeah. So soon, we're hoping. We'll see. I guess probably coming soon. But anyway, well, that's great. I really enjoyed this, Alejandro. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. We got we did resilience, parallel maps, either, and optics. You got any other features in Arrow that you want to mention that might be helpful for people who are new to FP and Arrow?
That's essentially the thing that most people use. There is one which I really like, and there's not such a big use case, which is called STM. That's software. It comes from software transactional memory, and this idea that sometimes you want to operate on several variables and treat them in an atomic way. So you really want to do transactions, but again, this depends on several variables, not one. So with something like atomic, like an atomic int or whatever, you have atomicity for one thing. What if you want atomicity for whole blocks? And that's what STMs brings in, which it's not that it's not such a common use case, especially like in UI, where most of the changes to like a state are single threaded. But for example, if you are keeping something like a global state for a server-side application where potentially many threads are doing this often again leads you to code where before you need to handle a lot of potential cases and inconsistency to say where you say, look, this block is atomic. If there is a problem in the middle, please go and roll back and tell me that you ended with an exception and I will deal with it. But you end up in a much better place than, well, there is an exception and you're in an inconsistent state, so what do you do now? So that's like the other main part we have in Arrow, apart from as I mentioned, there being a lot of modules which are essentially, what if I want to use this, but now we want to serialize my ithers? Okay, you need to bring the serialization library for Arrow and all of that. But
yeah, that's great. We've got another one here. What would be a good starting point? Is Arrow Core kind of where
most
people would start?
I actually would say that Arrow coroutines or Arrow resilience are the place where people get the most, the quickest. As you've shown, like if you have a schedule, you essentially go from code which is not protected for potential problems to something which just retries automatically. And if you are using nested data structures, of course, optics is the same thing. Arrow core is very nice, but it's true that it requires some changes on your code because suddenly you will have to deal with either, whereas in the other libraries you are essentially dealing with the same stuff as you were before.
That is fantastic. We got a question asking if you've got a YouTube channel.
I have videos posted on YouTube sometime, but I don't have a YouTube channel. No.
But I
just try to go to podcasts and like things like talking Kotlin. No. This setting up a channel is too much for me.
Too much, yeah. It's a lot of a lot to get into. But I would say for people who want to hear more, whoops, let's not add that there. Let's pull that up full screen. How about that? You do have you've written 4 books, and dude, I don't know how you've done it because like it's taken me like 5 years, and I'm almost done with my with my first book. But one of the books that you have written is Functional Programming Ideas for the Curious Kotliner. And I don't know if we've linked this in the description yet, but I'll make sure we add it after the live stream here. So yeah, if there is more that folks are interested in hearing from you, this would be a good place to start. You've got a few other books as well. Looks like some with Haskell even. So for the people who really want to go deeper, and you do have this kind of tutorial of Pokefun, kind of this project that people can work through. You want to tell us a little bit about this one?
Yeah, so the idea here is so I play a lot of trading card games, so I always like to choose this thing because it leads to very nice domain modeling, and the idea here is you want to build something to like, well, if people don't know about like trading card games, it's essentially a thing where you have a bunch of cards you can use, and then you create your own deck, and then play with other people who create their own deck. So a very common thing you build if you want to do this is something where you have like, you can search all the cards and then you want to create your deck. So it's a very typical CRUD application actually, like, right? So the idea here is you start with an implementation where you use essentially compose but no arrow at all, and then you try to bring different facets of Arrow to it. Like you have a place where you want to bring your you want to do the retries using a schedule, the one where you want to bring optics and all of that. So it's kind of a guide of it's a guide of problems, like starting from a realistic application, of course, quotes because it's very small, and then you actually build it, which I find a nicer way than having small problems, right? Like as I mentioned before, some of these things are very difficult to understand in a very narrow one line or to see the benefit. So the idea here is you work on a realistic application and apply this thing, and by the end you have something which essentially does the same thing, right? I mean, because the optics, for example, don't change the behavior, but now you are using all of these patterns, and hopefully by doing this yourself, you learn a bit more why Arrow is useful and when Arrow is useful, and then you have a glimpse of where you may want to use this on your own applications.
That sounds great. I know with the example code that I put together for today that it was really, when you're doing a live stream, there's only so much code you can share and for everybody to kind of get the full context of the app. So I try to keep the demo apps pretty small, but to have something that somebody can get into where it's like a little more of a realistic project that would exercise some of these things in a way that you kind of see the benefits a little bit more than you would with just kind of a lightweight app like I had today. So definitely everybody check that out when you get a chance for those people who are interested in picking up Arrow and learning more about it. So let's see, one more. Do you have online documentation for all those features? So yeah, we do have, let's see, you've got a lot of documentation, and you actually write a lot of the documentation here. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, as you can maybe see, I like writing, so it's like that's, I always say it's one thing that I don't know. I like a gift I got when I was like, most people say, oh, I have to write, but I like, oh, I have to write. So I just like writing. So that's how I got into writing
Yeah.
the books and this kind of things. I enjoy putting this kind of things together. That's actually, by the way, something where we are actually actively looking for contributors or just people who tell us, this part isn't clear. Please, I come from this background and all of this doesn't make sense because it's assumed we don't know this because we all come from our own background. So people want to just point us how we can improve this, that would be very useful. But yeah, there's a bunch of things there.
Yeah, that is great, and it's funny to hear too because I am one of those people who just likes as well to write documentation, which apparently is a weird thing. I've been kind of poked fun at different places just because I enjoy actually writing documentation. So anytime there was something to write, I'd usually get handed that task, but I'd take it on happily just because I enjoyed it so much. We do have, we will get a link to that in the chat. Let me just grab that now and see
arrow-kt.io. That's like the main.
Yeah, arrow-kt.io. So we will get that in the chat here at some point soon. All right. Well, Alejandro, I have really enjoyed talking with you, and I had a lot of fun having you review and critique my first foray into Arrow. So thanks so much for being here. And again, I apologize. This is the first time that we had a guest, and I did not expect to hold you this long. But I think we've all really enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot, and I think a lot of the listeners have as well.
It's now nighttime here, so it was a nice chat. I'm actually happy that we actually got the time to explain a bit more because doing some of these things in 5 minutes is quite difficult. So I'm really happy that you were open to have a real chat without having to finish in 20 minutes to explain why.
Yeah, it was newbie mistake on my part to assume that we could get this thing wrapped up in 30 minutes. So that was a little too aggressive, I guess. But yeah, it was fantastic, and I really enjoyed it, and everybody else here did as well. So everybody in chat, give him some applause or some reactions or whatever else to appreciate him. So thank you so much, Alejandro. Appreciate it. All right. Well, we have definitely gone longer than usual. I can't believe this is already an hour 20 minutes in, not counting the little hiccup we had there with the streaming software, but we do have some news. So we are going to get through some news and maybe a couple community comments, and then we'll wrap up. So let's take a quick look at what we've got in the news. The first thing that I wanted to point out is that we have the Kotlin 2.1.10 release that was just released a couple days ago. And this is a bug fix release. So it's got, I believe, exclusively bug fixes in this one. So be sure to ratchet up your projects from 2.1 to 2.1.10 whenever you get a chance and take advantage of those fixes. Next, we've got Google announcing the Android 16 beta. And as usual, this update's going to include a number of updates, and you know how you kind of have to once a year go through and make a little change here and there to your app to make sure it still stays compliant whenever you target the new version. So there's a little bit of that, but I did want to point out specifically the big one is that once you target API 36, you're going to be limited in your ability to lock screen rotation and to configure resizability. You can still intentionally opt out on it with 36, but 37 you won't be able to. And this applies, at least to start with, for screens that are at least 600 dp wide on their shorter width. So basically, we're talking about tablets and bigger. Phones probably, I think you'll still be able to rotate those, but or lock rotation on them. But on tablets is the main thing that this is going to affect for now. But I got to say, on the whole, I think we all know that we shouldn't be locking our rotation, right? Most of us probably would love for our apps to be able to adapt to different screen sizes and orientations. It often just kind of ends up being a lower priority. It's just kind of maybe it's just the nature of software business. I don't know. But in any case, there's going to be more pressure to support adaptive layouts going forward. Now, if you are one who likes to fill out surveys, you could take a look at the Kotlin 2.1 preview feature survey. So this one's particularly inquiring about things like pattern guards, which we looked at in the last live stream. things like multi-dollar string interpolation, non-local break and continue, and direct actualization for expect actual Java interop. I think a few of us were kind of scratching our heads on that one. I didn't even know that was a thing. That kind of flew under the radar for me. But it sounds like the idea there is you can support an expect actual relationship similar to a type alias, where you can just kind of pull in the whole thing from like a Java API, for example, but also keep the fully qualified path from the original type. So in other words, you keep that package name intact instead of changing it to the one wherever the type alias is located. So anyway, I know the Kotlin team loves hearing from the community about these things. So if you have feedback about those features, be sure to make your voice heard. We got KotlinConf. Unbelievably, just 4 months out. I really can't believe it, that it's already that close. The call for volunteers has closed. They do have a waitlist that you can join, just in case anybody can't make it. They also have the registrations for workshops open. So you can spend so KotlinConf is going to run, the conference is really officially on Thursday and Friday, but on that Wednesday of that week, you can do a workshop where you go deep on different topics. They've got coroutines, a couple of them on multi-platform. They got KTOR functional programming by Duncan McGregor. If you don't know him or don't follow him, he's very frequently posting on YouTube, I think once a week, posting about Kotlin stuff. So something for everybody, pretty much. So Elizabeth and I are both going to be at KotlinConf. We're excited about being there, and we were just getting all of our travel plans squared away and looking forward to meeting up with you guys. We won't have a booth yet this year, but we are planning to scope out maybe a spot where we can just kind of hang out and meet up with you all. So we would really look forward to doing that. We got a few other updates just for what we're doing. We now have the full code listings for Kotlin and Illustrated guide. They're available on GitHub. And as you know, most of the code examples in the book are short and easy to follow, but sometimes it's just helpful to see the surrounding context, like which classes or objects from the earlier examples need to be present in order for this specific code listing to work. Well, now you don't have to figure it out. You don't have to guess. You can just pull it up. It's right there for you. You can get there via the URL that you see here, or it's also in the description for the live stream here. And while you're there, give the repo a star. And you can also go to our GitHub organization and give us a follow there as well. And this is where all of the code for the live streams and videos are going to be going forward. So you'll be able to follow along or look back over things after the show like we had today. And finally, we are working really hard to get this print edition lined up. Just trying to get it across the finish line here. The PDF edition, so the version that you get on LeanPub or Fourth Wall, is going to finalize hopefully within the next week or two. And then the print edition should be following soon after that. And if you haven't already joined the waitlist for the print edition, you can go to print.typealias.com, drop your email in there, and I'll let you know when it's ready. And by the way, if you join that waitlist, there's no obligation to buy. It's really just so I can get to know how many people are planning to buy it at launch, so I know what to expect there, and so I can let you know as soon as it's ready. And the last update is that I know a lot of Android developers have moved over to Blue Sky, and since it looks like there are now enough of you there, it just kind of made sense for me to set up an account there as well. So you can find me on LinkedIn, X, and now on Blue Sky. Okay, let's see if we've got any other items here. I think we've already gone it's almost an hour and a half. So I think we're just gonna jump to a couple of quick community comments from you guys from recent videos that we had done where you all had some particularly outstanding comments that you mentioned that I thought were interesting or sometimes just funny. So we've got a couple of those for you today. The first one is replying to our previous episode when we covered pattern guards in Kotlin 2.1. Apollo in the house asked if we could just add Swift style guards to Kotlin like this. And yeah, you sure can. I think it's a great idea. The use of nothing here is really good. This is going to be a good way to do a check and to make sure that you have to return out of the function or throw an exception if something didn't, if that condition wasn't met. So that's a really cool idea. And we might even be able to make a second overload that could be used as a guardlet in Swift, where you assign the result to a variable if it's not null. So really cool. And I also think we might be able to use contracts even to give maybe it's like some smart casts or other guarantees beneath the guard that you had there. So yeah, good job, Apollo in the house. I like what you were thinking of there. And then finally, everybody always wants to be the first to comment on a video, and I wouldn't normally put this kind of thing on here, but the way this was done truly made me laugh. So good job, guys. This was somebody commenting that they were the first to post on the video, and they wrote it as a variable, and somebody came along and replaced it because they had used var. So I like the way Hussam came in and said this is the best cautionary tale against using var by default. So that was great. Made me laugh. Well, I think that's going to about do it for this episode. This is the longest episode we've ever done. Thanks again to Alejandro, our special guest, for being here today and walking us through Arrow. We'll have another live stream again soon, and in the meantime, keep writing that Kotlin code. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and I'll see you next time.